The Turkic peoples are a group of many different ethnic communities spread across a wide part of the world. They live in regions that extend from Central and East Asia to Siberia, the Middle East, and parts of Eastern Europe. What connects them is their use of Turkic languages, a family of related tongues spoken by around 200 million people today. Researchers believe that the earliest form of this language, called Proto-Turkic, developed somewhere in the eastern part of Central Asia, perhaps around the Altai or Sayan Mountains, or in Mongolia and Tuva. The people who spoke it may have once lived as both hunters and small-scale farmers before becoming nomadic herders. Over time, they adapted to the open steppe, moving with their animals and forming societies built around mobility and seasonal change. Throughout history, the Turkic world grew wider. Many groups joined through migration, conquest, or cultural contact. Some adopted the Turkic language through trade or intermarriage. Others kept parts of their older customs while blending with Turkic traditions. As a result, the Turkic peoples are not a single race or culture, but a collection of societies linked by shared language and certain common historical experiences. Today, well-known Turkic groups include the Turks of Anatolia, the Azerbaijanis, Uzbeks, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Turkmens, Uyghurs, Tuvans, Yakuts, and Shuvash, among others. Each of them has its own language, history, and way of life, yet all trace some connection to the early Turkic communities that once lived in Central and in Inner Asia. The following sections will explain how the name Turk first appeared, where the earliest Turkic homelands were located, how their languages spread across Eurasia, and how these peoples built states and empires that shaped much of Asian and European history. The word Turk first appeared as the name of a specific group known as the Göktürks. They were mentioned in inscriptions from the 6th century, written as Turug or Turuk. One of the earliest written sources comes from a letter sent in 585 CE by Ishbar Khagan to Emperor Wen of the Sui dynasty in China, in which he referred to himself as the Great Turk Khan. The term also appears in the Bugut inscription from 584 and in the later Orkhon inscriptions from 735. In these records, the name was written in several forms such as Turkic, Turk, or Turk. Roman and Greek authors may have referred to peoples with similar names long before that. Pomponius Mela, writing in the 1st century CE, mentioned a group called the Turcae north of the Sea of Azov, and Pliny the Elder listed the Turcae in the same area. Some even think older names found in Mesopotamian or Near Eastern texts, like Togarma, Turushka, or Turuku, could be ancient attempts to describe similar peoples. But the evidence is too limited to connect these older names directly to the Turks we know from later history. Chinese sources from the 7th century also offered explanations for the name. The Book of Zhou suggested that Turk came from the word for helmet because the shape of a mountain in the Altai region looked like one. Most researchers today agree that the term Turk comes from Old Turkic. It may have meant created or strong, or perhaps referred to a group that was united or assembled. Some scholars believe it was derived from an older verb ture, meaning to gather or to collect. This would fit the early Turkic tradition of confederations, groups of tribes that came together for mutual defense and shared leadership. The earliest Turkic-speaking peoples identified in Chinese records were the Yenisei Kyrgyz and a group called the Shinli, who lived in southern Siberia. Another early name found in the same sources is Dingling, which might also refer to a Turkic-speaking community. Over time, the term Turk became more widely used. In late antiquity and the Middle Ages, Greco-Roman and Byzantine writers often called many steppe peoples Scythians, even when they were not related to the real Scythians. Later, medieval European chroniclers used the same label for various Turkic groups who lived across the Eurasian steppe between the 4th and 16th centuries. The name Scuthai in Byzantine texts could refer to as many as a dozen different Turkic peoples. In modern Turkish, there is a distinction between Turk and Turkey. The first word refers to the Turkish people of modern Turkey, while Turkey is a broader term used for all Turkic-speaking peoples. Linguists, however, tend to use Turkic to describe the entire family of related peoples and languages, so that the discussion stays within historical and linguistic boundaries rather than political ones. The Turkic languages form a large language family with more than 35 known members. They are spoken across a vast part of Eurasia, from Eastern and Southern Europe to Central East and North Asia, and even parts of Western Asia. Altogether, around 200 million people speak a Turkic language today. Linguists believe that all of these languages descended from a single ancestor known as Proto-Turkic. It was probably spoken somewhere in East Asia, in a region stretching from Mongolia to northwest China. From there, speakers of this early language spread westward during the first millennium CE, bringing their speech and culture across Central Asia and beyond. The Turkic languages form what linguists call a dialect continuum. This means that neighboring varieties can often understand each other quite well, while the languages spoken farther apart can differ more significantly. Among the many Turkic tongues, Turkish has the largest number of speakers, mostly in Anatolia and the Balkans. Turkish alone makes up roughly 38% of all Turkic speakers. It is followed by Uzbek, spoken widely in Central Asia. Most Turkic languages share several distinct features. They follow vowel harmony, where the vowels within a word match in tone and shape. Their grammar is agglutinative, meaning words are built up by adding many small endings that each carry a clear meaning. Sentences usually follow a subject-object-verb order, and these languages do not have grammatical gender. Because of these shared traits, it is often possible for speakers of closely related languages to understand one another after only some exposure. This is especially true within the Oghuz branch, which includes Turkish, Azerbaijani, Turkmen, Qashqai, Chaharmahali Turkic, Gagauz, and Balkan Gagauz Turkish. These languages are very close, while others, like Uzbek or Kazakh, belong to different branches but still show clear structural similarities. The Turkic family is usually divided into two main groups. The first is Uyghur, whose only surviving language today is Chuvash, spoken in parts of Russia. The second is Common Turkic, which includes all other Turkic languages found across Eurasia. Over time, Turkic languages have also shown similarities to other language families, such as Mongolic, Tungusic, Korean, and Japanese. This led some scholars to propose that all of them once belonged to a single larger family called Altaic. However, most historical linguists today reject this idea. The similarities between these languages are now seen as the result of long-term contact and mutual influence, rather than shared ancestry. Earlier in the 20th century, linguists even grouped the Turkic and Uralic languages together in what they called the Ural-Altaic hypothesis. This idea also has been largely abandoned because there is not enough evidence to prove that these language families ever came from a single source. Instead, it is now understood that the Turkic languages developed independently, but their speakers lived close enough to other peoples, such as the Mongols and Tungus, that their languages influenced one another over many centuries. The question of where the Turkic peoples first came from has been discussed for many years. Most researchers agree that the earliest Turkic homeland was somewhere in Central or East Asia. The historian Peter Benjamin Golden suggested two likely regions: the southern part of the Altai-Sayan Mountains and the area of southern Siberia stretching from Lake Baikal to eastern Mongolia. Other studies have pointed to Mongolia or Tuva as possible early centers of Turkic development. Some linguists have also tried to connect the Turkic languages to Mongolic and Tungusic, proposing that all three might have come from a broader region in northeastern Asia, possibly around Manchuria. This idea, sometimes called the Trans-Eurasian hypothesis, has both supporters and critics. Many specialists believe that the similarities among these language families came from centuries of close contact, not from a single common origin. Genetic and archaeological studies have added new clues. Some researchers link the ancestors of Turkic peoples to Neolithic agricultural communities in northeastern China, especially those associated with the Xinglangwa and Hongshan cultures. These ancient populations were among the earliest to grow millet, and they left traces of genetic ancestry that appear in some modern Turkic groups. However, other studies have challenged this view. They found that Turkic peoples seem to share stronger genetic ties with ancient populations from the Amur River region, farther north and east of Manchuria. This would place their early roots in what is now northeastern Asia. Around 20,200 BCE, the ancestors of the Turkic peoples appear to have moved westward into Mongolia. There they adopted a pastoral way of life, raising livestock and relying on the mobility of herding societies. They also came into contact with Iranian-speaking groups, from whom they borrowed elements of nomadic culture. Genetic data show that nomadic peoples such as the Xiongnu, Rouran, and Xianbei shared common ancestry linked to populations of northeastern Asia, which supports the idea that the Proto-Turkic language developed in that broader region. Modern genetic studies have found that nearly all Turkic-speaking peoples retain at least some ancestry connected to populations from South Siberia and Mongolia. This has led researchers to identify this area as the Inner Asian homeland, the place from which the early Turkic speakers began to expand. The main wave of Turkic migrations took place between the 5th and 16th centuries, a period that partly overlapped with the rise of the Mongol Empire. The Mongol conquests accelerated the process of Turkic expansion, not because large numbers of Mongols resettled elsewhere, but because many Turkic tribes joined the Mongol armies. As the Mongol Empire grew, Turkic soldiers and leaders spread across much of Eurasia, reinforcing the reach of Turkic language and culture. There is also genetic evidence that suggests some continuity between ancient Eastern Scythians and the Turkic peoples of the Altai region. Modern Central Asian Turkic groups appear to have formed through a mixture of Scythian-like populations, genetically close to today's Tajiks, and groups from the Eastern steppe related to the Xiongnu during the Iron Age. Over several millennia, this mixture sure shifted the genetic balance of the Eurasian steppe from predominantly Indo-European and Iranian ancestry to a stronger East Asian component. Studies from the last decade have provided a clearer picture. One 2018 analysis found that the steppe populations gradually changed from West Eurasian to East Eurasian ancestry over the past 4,000 years, largely due to the spread of Turkic and Mongolic peoples out of Mongolia. A 2022 study showed that most Turkic and Mongolic populations of Central Asia descended from a blend of Indo-Iranian groups and Northeastern Asian peoples. Among them, the Turkmens were somewhat different, showing less East Asian ancestry and more continuity with older Indo-Iranian populations. A 2023 genetic study examined the remains of Empress Ashina, a member of the royal Göktürk family who lived in the 6th century. Her DNA was found to be overwhelmingly Northeast Asian, with only a small trace of West Eurasian ancestry. This supported the idea that the core Turkic populations of that time came from the eastern steppes. Yet other early Turkic groups, such as those from the central steppe, already showed mixed ancestry, combining both eastern and western elements. Later Turkic peoples like the Karakhanids and Kipchaks also displayed a similar blend, which suggests that the Turkic expansion always involved both movement and interaction with local populations. Some of the earliest separate Turkic peoples mentioned in Chinese records were the Gekun and the Shinli, who lived near the borders of the late Xiongnu Confederation around 200 BCE at the same time as the Han Dynasty. Other groups, such as the Tila, may have been related to the Xiongnu or the Dingling, and some researchers think that the later Ashina tribe, founders of the first Turkic Khaganate, descended from these TLA peoples. There is also a long debate about the Xiongnu themselves. Some historians have proposed that they were early Turkic speakers, or that the Turks were their descendants. The Xiongnu probably included many different ethnic and linguistic groups, but several studies suggest that Turkic languages may have been spoken by at least part of their population. Genetic evidence from Xiongnu graves shows a mix of Western and Eastern Eurasian ancestry, which supports the idea that they were a confederation rather than a single people. The first time the name Turk appeared clearly in historical records was during the rise of the Göktürks, also known as the First Turkic Khaganate in the 6th century. Chinese chronicles such as the Book of Zhou mention that the Turks came to China's borders in the 540s to trade for silk and establish diplomatic relations. Around this time, a Sogdian ambassador helped form contact between the Western Wei dynasty in China and the emerging Turkic leaders on the steppe. According to early Chinese histories, like the Book of Sui and the Tongdian, the Turks were originally a group of mixed tribes living in what is now Gansu province. They sought protection under the powerful Rouran Confederation. Other records, such as the Book of Zhou, the history of the northern dynasties, and the New Book of Tang, describe the ruling Ashina clan as being part of the older Xiongnu Confederation. Some sources even claim the Turks came from a small state called Suo, north of Xiongnu lands. The Ashina clan were known as skilled metalworkers. They were granted land south of the Altai Mountains, a region said to resemble a helmet in shape. From this image, Chinese writers suggested that their name, Tue, meaning Turk, came from the word helmet. Whether or not that etymology is true, it marked the first time the term Turk appeared as a political name. By the mid-6th century, the Ashina had become strong enough to defeat the Tila tribes on behalf of their Rouran overlords, and soon after they overthrew the Rourans entirely. Out of this victory came the first Turkic Khaganate, the Göktürk state. The Göktürks organized their rule around a Khagan, or supreme ruler, from the Ashina family, but power was also shared among tribal leaders who formed a council. They were also the first Turkic people to use their own writing system, known as the Orkhon script, which recorded their language in runic-like symbols. From their base in Mongolia, the Göktürks expanded rapidly westward to the Caspian Sea. In the early 580s, their empire split into two parts. the Eastern Turkic Khaganate in Mongolia and Manchuria, and the Western Turkic Khaganate in Central Asia, covering much of present-day Kazakhstan. The two branches sometimes cooperated, but often fought one another. In 1630, the Chinese Tang dynasty defeated the Eastern Turks and placed their lands under Chinese protection. However, a new Turkic state later rose again in 682, known as the Second Turkic Khaganate. It reasserted control over much of the steppe until internal conflicts and wars with the Chinese and Tibetans led to its collapse in 744. Afterward, a new Turkic power, the Uyghur Khaganate, took its place. While the Göktürks were building their state in the east, other Turkic groups were spreading westward across the steppe. Among them were the Bulgars, who settled between the Caspian and Black Seas in the 5th and 6th centuries. They were later conquered by another Turkic group, the Khazars, who became powerful enough to control trade routes linking Europe and Asia. The Khazars are notable for having converted to Judaism in the 8th or 9th century, a rare case among steppe empires. After the Khazars came the Pechenegs, who formed a large confederation across the steppe, followed by the Cumans and Kipchaks, who dominated the region afterward. Some Bulgars migrated north along the Volga River and mixed with local Finno-Ugric peoples, creating what became known as Volga Bulgaria. This state adopted Islam in 922 and became an important center of trade between the Islamic world, Russia, and Central Asia. In the 13th century, the Mongols swept westward and conquered Volga Bulgaria, as well as most of the Turkic steppe lands. They established the Golden Horde, which ruled over Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and parts of Western Siberia. Under the Golden Horde, the Turkic-speaking peoples and the Mongol elites gradually merged. The ruling class became Muslim and adopted the Kipchak Turkic language, which spread widely across the steppe. Russians and Europeans came to refer to all these peoples as Tatars. The Golden Horde later broke into smaller states, including the Crimean Khanate, the Khanate of Kazan, and the Kazakh Khanate. These successor states were eventually conquered by the expanding Russian Empire between the 16th and 19th centuries. Farther north, another Turkic power arose, the Siberian Khanate. It was founded in the late 15th century by Tatar nobles who had fled the collapse of the Golden Horde. The Siberian Khanate ruled over both Turkic and Uralic peoples and made Islam its official religion. It became the northernmost Muslim state in history. In 1598, it fell to the advancing Russian forces, marking the beginning of Russian expansion into Siberia. After the fall of the Second Turkic Khaganate, a new Turkic power rose in its place, the Uyghur Khaganate. It was established in 744 CE by the Uyghurs, who built their capital city at Ordu Balik in the Orkhon Valley of central Mongolia. This location, rich in pasture and trade routes, became one of the most prosperous centers in Inner Asia. Through contact and trade with China, the Uyghurs developed a more settled lifestyle than the earlier nomadic Turks. Many of them moved from herding to farming, and their capital became an organized city with markets, artisans, and places of worship. The Uyghur state also produced a significant amount of written material. Many of its people could read and write, and they used several scripts, including one that would later influence Mongolian writing systems. During the same period, another Turkic group called the Shatuo Turks began to rise in influence, particularly in northern and central China. The Shatuo were initially one of several Turkic tribes living on China's frontier. Around the early 9th century, 30,000 Shatuo soldiers defected from the Tibetan side and offered their service to the Chinese Tang dynasty. The Tang emperors accepted them and recognized the Shatuo as valuable allies. In exchange, the Shatuo helped the Tang armies fight against other Turkic groups, including the Uyghurs. This cooperation between the Tang and the Shatuo eventually played a major role in the downfall of the Uyghur Khaganate. In 840 CE, the Yenisei Kyrgyz, allied with Tang China, launched a major attack on the Uyghurs. They destroyed the Uyghur capital and ended the Khaganate. Many Uyghurs were killed or forced to flee, and their state disappeared from Mongolia. The Shatuo, meanwhile, remained a significant military and political force in northern China. After the Tang dynasty collapsed in 907, they established their own dynasties during a period known as the Five Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms. The first of these was the later Tang dynasty, founded in 923 by the Shatuo leader Li Kunsu. His family had been adopted into the Tang imperial line and given Chinese titles, so when they took power, they claimed to be restoring the Tang rather than replacing it. After the later Tang fell in 937, the Shatuo continued to rule through other short-lived dynasties such as the later Jin, later Han, and northern Han. Eventually, these states were absorbed by the new Song dynasty, which reunified much of China. The remaining Shatuo population, now largely Sinicized, became known as the Oghuz Turks, living in Inner Mongolia. Over time, the Oghuz mixed with Mongol tribes and disappeared as a distinct group. As the Turkic world expanded westward, several new empires emerged that connected the Turkic peoples with the Islamic and Persian cultural spheres. These states not only transformed the politics of Central and South Asia, but also reshaped Turkic identity through contact with new religions and traditions. One of the first major powers in this period was the Ghaznavid dynasty. It was founded in 977 by Sebuktigin, a former Turkic slave soldier or Mamluk, who inherited control of the city of Ghazna after the death of his father-in-law Alptigin. The Ghaznavids ruled over a large region that included parts of modern Iran, Afghanistan, Transoxiana, and the northwestern Indian subcontinent. Although their founders were of Turkic origin, the Ghaznavids quickly became Persianized. They adopted the Persian language and administrative traditions, supported Persian literature, and blended Turkic military culture with Iranian governance. For that reason, historians often describe the Ghaznavid state as Turco-Persian. Under rulers like Mahmud of Ghazni, the dynasty reached its height, conducting military campaigns deep into northern India and promoting Islam in the region. Following the Ghaznavids came another major power, the Seljuk Empire, founded by the Kyrgyz branch of the Oghuz Turks. The Seljuks rose to prominence in the early 11th century under Tugril Beg and Chagri Beg, two brothers who led their followers westward from the steppes near the Aral Sea. By 1037, they had seized control of Khorasan and then expanded into Persia. The Seljuks established a vast empire stretching from Central Asia and Persia to Anatolia and the eastern Mediterranean. Their armies defeated the Byzantine Empire at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, opening most of Anatolia to Turkic settlement. This event not only marked the beginning of Turkic dominance in Asia Minor, but also contributed to the launch of the First Crusade by European powers seeking to reclaim the Holy Land. Like the Ghaznavids before them, Seljuks blended Turkic leadership with Persian administrative culture. Persian became the language of government and literature, while Arabic remained the language of religion and scholarship. The Seljuks ruled as Sunni Muslims, and their support for Islamic learning and law helped shape the religious life of the Muslim world for centuries. By the mid-12th century, the Seljuk Empire began to weaken due to internal rivalries and external pressures. Around 1260, the Mongols invaded and divided Anatolia into small regional states known as emirates. Out of these smaller powers, one, led by the Ottoman family, would later rise to dominate the entire region. In the late 14th century, another Turkic conqueror emerged in Central Asia, Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane. He founded the Timurid Empire in 1370 after a series of campaigns that united much of Central Asia and Iran. Timur's empire combined Mongol military traditions with Turkic leadership and Persian culture. Although his conquests were brutal, his rule also encouraged a remarkable period of artistic and scientific growth known as the Timurid Renaissance. Cities like Samarkand and Herat became centers of architecture, mathematics, astronomy, and poetry. In Persia, new Turkic dynasties continued to rise. The Afsharid dynasty was established in 1736 by Nader Shah, a military leader from the Turkic Afshar tribe. Nader Shah expanded Iran's borders farther than they had reached since the Sassanid period, briefly creating one of the strongest empires in Asia. After his death, another Turkic family, the Qajars, took power. The Qajar dynasty, founded in 1789, ruled Iran until 1925. The Qajar rulers consolidated their control over the country after defeating the remnants of the previous Zand dynasty. Under their rule, Iran reasserted sovereignty over much of the Caucasus, though it later lost many of those territories, including modern Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Dagestan, to the expanding Russian Empire. Meanwhile, in Anatolia, the Western Oghuz Turks, who had entered the region under the Seljuks, established their own smaller principalities. Over time, one of these principalities, led by Osman I, developed into the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans built a state that would last for more than 600 years, eventually spanning Southeast Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Their rise marked the beginning of a new and long phase in Turkic history, one that connected the steppe traditions of Central Asia with the Islamic and Mediterranean worlds. The spread of Islam among the Turkic peoples was a gradual process that unfolded over several centuries. It began with early contact through trade and warfare with Muslim communities in Central Asia and the Middle East, and eventually transformed the religious and cultural character of much of the Turkic world. The first significant encounters between Turkic tribes and Islam took place around the 8th century. Among the earliest Turkic groups to adopt the new faith were the Karluks, who lived near the western edge of the steppe, close to Islamic lands. The Karluks' conversion opened a gateway through which Islam began to move deeper into Central Asia. The process accelerated during the 9th and 10th centuries as Turkic peoples came under the influence of neighboring Muslim powers. The Volga Bulgars, who lived along the Middle Volga River, officially accepted Islam in 922. Their conversion was facilitated by contact with Muslim traders and by diplomatic relations with the Abbasid Caliphate. The Volga Bulgaria later became an important center of Islamic culture and trade in northern Eurasia. Around the same time, Islam also reached other Turkic-speaking groups such as the Uyghurs, Kyrgyz, Turkmens, and Kipchaks. These conversions did not happen all at once. In some cases, political leaders adopted the faith first, followed by their people. In other cases, Islam spread gradually through contact with merchants, missionaries, and Sufi teachers who traveled along the Silk Road. For some Turkic groups, conversion to Islam also provided political advantages. It connected them to the broader Muslim world and helped legitimize their rule among neighboring Islamic states. By the 11th century, Islam had become a defining part of Turkic identity across much of Central Asia and the Middle East, especially under the Ghaznavids and Seljuks, who actively promoted it. Even so, not all Turkic peoples became Muslim. Some continued to follow their older religious traditions, such as the animistic and shamanistic beliefs that had shaped their worldview for centuries. Others adopted different faiths. The Khazars, for example, embraced Judaism. Some communities in the western steppe became Christian, and others practiced Buddhism or Burkhanism in parts of Siberia and Mongolia. Small groups of Turkic Zoroastrians also existed in areas once under Persian influence. In the later centuries, the political map of the Turkic world changed dramatically. The most powerful Turkic state, the Ottoman Empire, gradually began to weaken. For centuries, it had ruled large parts of southeastern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. But by the 18th and 19th centuries, repeated wars with Russia, Austria, and other European powers, along with internal problems and nationalist uprisings in the Balkans, reduced its strength. By the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire had collapsed, and from its remains emerged the Republic of Turkey in 1923. Under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the new republic sought to modernize and secularize the state, while preserving Turkish identity as the core of national unity. Turkey became the only independent Turkic country for much of the 20th century. Elsewhere, the Turkic peoples of Central Asia faced a different fate. After the fall of the Russian Empire in the early 20th century, they were absorbed into the Soviet Union. Regions like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Azerbaijan were turned into Soviet republics. During this period, Turkic languages and cultures were heavily influenced by Soviet policies. Local elites were often replaced, and the use of the Russian language expanded in government, education, and public life. In western China, the region historically known as Chinese Turkestan or Xinjiang became part of the Republic of China and later the People's Republic of China. Efforts by local Turkic peoples, particularly the Uyghurs, to establish independent states were short-lived. The first East Turkestan Republic appeared briefly in the 1930s, but was quickly suppressed. Since then, Xinjiang has remained under Chinese control, though its Turkic population continues to maintain distinct cultural and linguistic traditions. Throughout much of the 20th century, Turkey stood alone as the only sovereign Turkic nation-state. However, the end of the Soviet Union in 1991 changed that. As the USSR dissolved, 5 new Turkic states gained their independence: Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. Other Turkic regions, such as Tatarstan, Tuva, and Yakutia, remained as autonomous republics within the Russian Federation. Following independence, these new countries began establishing diplomatic and cultural ties with Turkey and with one another. Over time, cooperation between Turkic states became more organized. In 1993, they founded Turksoy, an institution for cultural collaboration. Later, in 2009, the Turkic Council was formed to strengthen political and economic relations. In 2021, it was renamed the Organization of Turkic States, signaling a renewed sense of shared identity among the Turkic nations.